I look forward to being at the G20 in a few weeks as an opportunity to engage with a number of world leaders with whom we have either good working relationships or challenges. And the opportunity to engage with the Chinese president directly is certainly something that we are looking at.
Half a year of crisis, Mr. Speaker, and only today the Prime Minister said he's considering engaging directly with the Chinese leadership. Considering getting involved after 6 months, Mr. Speaker.
Just 2 weeks ago, a parliamentary delegation went to China and raised the cases of the detained Canadians, as well as canola, as well as the pork. I was on that delegation, and unfortunately, the Conservative MPs chose to send no one.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will be heading to the G20 at the end of the month. As you heard, he's floating the idea of engaging directly with Chinese President Xi. But given Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland admits she can't get FaceTime with her Chinese counterpart, how likely is a Xi-Trudeau meeting? Time for the Power Panel in Toronto. Tim Murphy, Managing Director of Macmillan Vantage. Steps away from Tim are Hill and Knowlton's Melissa Lanceman, along with former Saskatchewan Finance Minister Andrew Thompson, now Chief of Government Relations for University of Toronto. And here with me, Evan Dyer of CBC News. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Evan, why don't I start with you? The Prime Minister has been continually asked about China. Early on into this diplomatic dispute, like back in December, the opposition was saying you should be picking up the phone and calling the president and meeting. They initially resisted those calls. Talk a bit about what this development means.
Well, I think, we've heard, as you say, from Chrystia Freeland. She tried to get Wang Yi on the phone, the foreign minister of China, a number of times. He won't answer. I guess this is taking it to a higher level. You know, Canada, I think one of the things we've learned also is why the Trudeau government was somewhat reluctant to fire John McCallum. If you recall, when he started to sort of diverge from the official government line, they hesitated to do that. And I think that one of the things we've seen is that perhaps they had advance notice that if they pulled an ambassador out of China, it would be very hard to get another one in. And clearly the Chinese don't want to create any openings for Canada to talk to them on any level until they get what they would call compliance or progress on their demands. And they constantly talk in their morning news conferences about Canada having to correct its behavior first. That's the phrase they use. So, I don't see that it would be any more likely that Prime Minister Trudeau will have any success that Chrystia Freeland hasn't been able to have, because China is a top-down country. This is clearly a top-down decision. He might be able to buttonhole him in Osaka on the sidelines of the G20 if she isn't able to avoid him first. But what would we expect to come from that conversation? I don't think that there's any signal coming from China that there's going to be any progress. And this whole dispute between Canada and China also, I don't think it'll be settled in Osaka or anywhere else. There's two places where this is going to get resolved. The courtroom in Vancouver, that's one, and the other one is in the Oval Office.
What might we, Melissa, expect if that meeting does occur on the sidelines in Japan?
Well, I don't think that it will, unless it's certainly by accident. But we're talking about a bigger issue here, and the fact that the Trudeau government has had no strategy around China, and it's haphazard. And you see that when you see the Prime Minister floating the idea of, I'm considering meeting with a world leader who absolutely doesn't want to meet with me. I don't understand it. Canadians don't understand it. The Canadians that are stuck in prison there don't understand it. The canola farmers don't understand it, and soon our economy won't understand it.
Tim, does she have a point?
We must be getting close to an election because the partisan rhetoric is starting to heat up. I mean, let's be fair. I mean, look, we go back and look at the way China's behaving in the international community, and it is clearly a much more assertive China, much more aggressive, no matter where it is. And I think the language that Evan was referring to exactly reflects that, which is they want Canada to, quote, correct its behavior. And I think no amount of empty rhetoric in Canada from the opposition or from the government was going to change how China views its right to exercise its power in the international stage. And I think, proposing meetings that won't go anywhere is what I guess opposition parties do, and you may try and get the opportunity around a G20. Frankly, that's what that was set up to do, to create avenues for informal discussions. And so you try and have those discussions saying, look, is there a path through this or not? And if there's not, and this is a realpolitik play, well, then we'll just have to play realpolitik, but maybe there is a way through. But I think to say that there's no strategy is the triumph of rhetoric over reality.
What changed, Andrew, do you think, between the time when the Prime Minister was insistent that a meeting or a call between himself and President Xi would not advance the cause to the potential for that happening now?
I do think it is largely driven by domestic politics and the domestic audience that's wanting to hear a tougher, slightly more muscular approach on the China issues than what the Prime Minister was previously signaling. He's probably right in the first instance that the call itself would not make a huge difference given the items that are on the table. That said, telling people that you're not prepared to do anything, even at the risk of failure, I don't think sits very well. The China file's particularly problematic for the country. What Prime Minister Trudeau and the Liberals inherited from the Harper government wasn't a good hand to be playing. The Conservative policy with China really wasn't working particularly well. I think the challenge we saw as the Liberals started to engage on it is they overplayed their hand. There was this great belief that somehow we could wind back the clock to 1972 and that the Chinese and Canada would have this equal kind of footing in terms of relations, and that the Prime Minister would be able to get some kind of great trade deal. None of that happened. The Chinese don't believe, I think very sincerely, do not believe that we are equals with them. They see us very much as part of an American universe, and we've got to figure out within that kind of new dynamic how to work with China. And there's been lots of advice given to the government on what to do with that, in terms of improving its relations through civil organizations to looking at sectoral trade agreements. But what we've got right now is a situation as the election creeps up of the Prime Minister having to look a lot tougher.
Do you think that's fair of it? I mean, it's not as though things. I mean, your point is well taken that it'd be hard for anything to abate without something happening in the courts or a trade deal with the U.S.
And it's not just. I agree the Trudeau government doesn't know how to deal with China, but I would say the whole West hasn't figured out how to deal with China.
I agree.
And I would also say, by the way, China hasn't figured out how to deal with the West. And if you listen to China experts, they will point out that China is seriously hurting its international reputation through these hostage takings, as I always refer to them, and it's going to find it very hard to claw its way back to respectability afterwards and to be trusted by Western nations. But at the same time, we made naive assumptions that China would become a more rules-abiding country as it became wealthier. It didn't, and yet we never really adjusted our strategies. And so now we find ourselves in this confrontation. I don't see how any Western country has really found a better way to negotiate it with China than we have.
It's interesting. We have an interview coming up later in the show that I conducted a bit earlier today with the president of Tibetans in Exile.
Right.
And he said, this isn't a surprise. This is, as he's seen it play out, he sort of thinks to himself, we told you so.
Yeah. I'm sure that people who've been watching the Chinese Communist Party for decades all think that, because this is not a leopard that has changed its spots.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.